The gravel road stretched endlessly ahead, coiling through the dense tangle of towering pines and skeletal birch trees, their bare branches scratching at the twilight sky like the twisted fingers of forgotten corpses clawing upward from the frozen earth, and the only sound accompanying the slow, cautious progression of the battered old pickup truck was the steady crunch of tires over frost-hardened stones and the whisper of wind through the skeletal forest, a haunting lullaby that carried the echo of distant memories, memories best left buried. Inside the truck, Hannah shifted uncomfortably in the passenger seat, her breath steaming in the frigid air as she rubbed her hands together, glancing uneasily at the man beside her, her boyfriend, Tyler, whose face was drawn tight with focus, jaw clenched, his knuckles bone-white where they gripped the wheel, the shadows of the forest casting shifting patterns across his pale features as the last rays of the dying sun bled across the horizon in a smear of crimson and gold, the color of fresh spilled blood drying on snow. "This place is remote," Hannah murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, though it felt somehow wrong to break the oppressive silence that had settled over them like a burial shroud the moment they turned off the main road some 40 miles back, the map on Tyler's phone long since useless in the dead zones of these forgotten woods. "That's the point," Tyler replied, but even his voice lacked conviction now, the confident bravado he'd carried when suggesting this weekend getaway. The idea of unplugging from the endless grind of city life, slowly unraveling into something taut and brittle, a tension he tried and failed to mask. The cabin appeared at last as they rounded a final bend. A slouching, weather-worn structure of gray timber and rotting shingles perched on the edge of a frozen lake, its windows dark hollows that seemed to watch their approach with malevolent indifference, and as the truck rattled to a stop, the engine coughing into silence, a suffocating stillness swallowed them whole, broken only by the distant, mournful cry of something unseen in the depths of the forest. "It's charming," Hannah said weakly, her breath clouding the air as she stepped out, her boots crunching against snow crusted with old, dirty ice, and though she tried to shake the unease prickling her skin, she couldn't ignore the way the trees seemed to press closer here, gnarled and unnatural, as though the forest itself were holding its breath. They unpacked in silence, their voices subdued, footsteps muffled by the snow, and as they forced the warped front door open, its hinges shrieking in protest, the smell hit them first, the damp, musty scent of rot, of things left to decay in the dark, but beneath it, faint, almost imperceptible, was something else, something coppery, metallic, something that made the hair on Hannah's neck bristle as a chill danced down her spine like icy fingers tracing her vertebrae. The cabin's interior was a relic of some bygone era. Dust-choked furniture draped in tattered sheets, a crumbling stone fireplace, walls lined with peeling wallpaper whose faded patterns twisted into grotesque shapes in the dim light of the single gas lantern Tyler managed to coax to life. The air was cold, biting, and filled with the weight of forgotten memories, as though the walls themselves were steeped in sorrow, soaked in despair. "Maybe we should head back," Hannah murmured, her breath frosting in the air as she shivered beneath her thick coat, her eyes darting to the darkened corners of the cabin where shadows pooled like stagnant water. Tyler forced a grin, shaking his head. "Come on, it'll be fine. Just need some air. We'll light a fire, make dinner, and by morning, you'll love it." But as night fell in earnest, darkness swallowing the last vestiges of daylight, something shifted in the air. A pressure, a weight, something ancient and hungry stirring beneath the frozen earth, and deep in the woods, something moved. The first scream shattered the brittle silence just after midnight. It was faint at first, distant, barely more than a whisper on the wind, but it clawed at the edges of Hannah's consciousness, dragging her from restless sleep as she sat bolt upright on the sagging mattress in the cabin's lone bedroom, heart pounding, breath hitching in her throat as she strained to listen. Nothing. Only the wind, rattling the glass panes, the slow creak of timber settling, the rhythmic drip of melting ice. But then, again, a cry. Sharp, wet, and terrible, rising and falling in jagged, broken gasps, the unmistakable sound of raw, unfiltered agony. "Tyler," she hissed, shaking him awake, her hands trembling as panic surged through her veins like ice water, her voice barely more than a rasp. "Did you hear that?" He groaned, disoriented, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Hear what?" But even as he spoke, the scream came again, closer this time, followed by something far worse. A guttural, animalistic growl, deep and wet, like the sound of flesh tearing from bone, and the snap of something brittle giving way. They bolted from the bed, breathless, pulse hammering in their skulls as they fumbled for the lantern, its flickering light casting long, distorted shadows that slithered across the warped floorboards, and as they crept toward the front window, Hannah's hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the lantern. The trees outside were still, but the snow beneath them was not. Dark stains marred the pristine white, streaks of crimson smeared across the drifts in gruesome patterns, and in the distance, half obscured by twisted trunks and skeletal branches, they saw it, a figure, hunched and shivering, its limbs wrong, its movements jerky and unnatural, dragging something heavy through the snow, leaving behind a trail of viscera that glistened wetly in the lantern's pale glow. "What the hell?" Tyler began, but his voice broke, strangled by the sudden, unbearable certainty that whatever they were looking at, whatever this was not human, not anymore. The figure stopped. Its head, if it could be called that, twitched violently, snapping upward with grotesque speed, and though the distance was great, Hannah could feel its gaze lock onto hers, as though invisible hooks had sunk into the marrow of her bones, tethering her to that unspeakable thing in the dark. Then it moved. Fast. Too fast. A blur of motion, impossibly silent across the snow, and in the space of a heartbeat, the forest swallowed it whole, leaving only the crimson trail and the dreadful, suffocating certainty that it was coming. They locked the doors. They barricaded the windows. They huddled in the center of the cabin, knives clutched in trembling hands, breath steaming in the frigid air as the wind howled and the darkness pressed closer, and somewhere, out there in the endless woods, something hunted them. The hours stretched, warped by terror, until the first gray sliver of dawn bled through the eastern sky, cold and pale, and when at last Tyler dared to peek through the boarded windows, the snow was undisturbed, clean, untouched. No blood, no tracks, no sign of the horrors they'd glimpsed, as though the night itself had devoured all evidence, leaving behind only the memory, sharp and poisonous. "We imagined it," Tyler whispered hoarsely, though his eyes betrayed the lie, wide and haunted, rimmed with red from sleepless terror. But Hannah said nothing. Because she had seen, in that final flash of movement, the glint of steel in the creature's hand, long, rusted blade stitched into the twisted remains of human fingers. And the tattered remnants of flesh that still clung to its jaw, ragged strips of meat torn free by gnashing teeth that were far, far too human. And deep down, beneath the terror, a cold certainty took root: whatever haunted these woods was no monster of folklore, no ancient evil or spectral wraith. It was something far worse. Something human. Or something that used to be. And it was still out there. Watching. Waiting. Hunting. The cold had teeth. It sank deep into their bones as the hours stretched into an eternity, the cabin's ancient wood groaning under the weight of the wind, a low and ceaseless moan like something wounded but not yet dead, and inside, Tyler and Hannah sat in rigid silence, backs pressed against the farthest wall, eyes fixed on the door as if sheer force of will alone could keep whatever monstrosity lurked beyond from finding them. Hannah's teeth chattered uncontrollably, but it wasn't from the cold. No, the cold was secondary now, a distant thing buried beneath the suffocating weight of terror that had hollowed her out from the inside, leaving behind only a shaking shell. She kept hearing it, that wet, gurgling sound of flesh being torn, the animalistic growls twisted by something deeply, hideously wrong. And beneath it all, the laughter. Faint, bubbling, almost childlike. It haunted the edges of her thoughts like a splinter in the brain. Tyler gripped the rusted hunting knife they'd found in a kitchen drawer, his knuckles white, his breathing shallow, too quick. Neither of them had slept, not truly. Every creak, every whisper of the wind sent fresh waves of panic crashing over them. They hadn't spoken since the creature, no, the thing, disappeared into the trees. When the sun finally clawed its way over the horizon, pallid and lifeless, they moved mechanically. They had to leave. Immediately. Hannah's voice cracked when she spoke, her lips numb, her tongue thick and useless. "We need to get to the truck." Tyler nodded, but there was something strange in his eyes now, something frayed, distant. He blinked too much. His hands twitched. The events of the night had already carved their mark into his mind. When they stepped outside, the air was unnervingly still. No birds. No wind. Only the soft crunch of their boots as they made their way toward the pickup. And that's when they saw it. The truck's windshield had been shattered, spiderweb fractures radiating from a deep, jagged hole in the center, and across the hood, scrawled in some dark, sticky substance that Hannah knew instantly was blood, was a single word: run. She stumbled back, hand clamped over her mouth, bile rising in her throat. Tyler swore under his breath, racing forward to wrench open the driver's door. The interior was worse. Splashes of crimson coating the seats, viscera draped grotesquely across the dashboard, the stench of rotten iron so thick it made her gag. The keys were gone. A low moan escaped Hannah's throat, panic curling around her heart like a fist. "We're trapped," she whispered, her breath frosting in the icy air. "Tyler, we're..." A branch snapped. "Close. Too close." They bolted, slipping on ice, scrambling back toward the cabin as the trees came alive with movement. Shadows flitting between trunks, flashes of something pale, something wrong. Tyler fumbled with the door, slamming it shut just as a blur of motion streaked past the window. For a moment, there was only breathless silence. Then, the sound of fingernails, no, claws, scraping against the wood, slow, deliberate, as though savoring the taste of their fear. The walls shuddered with impact. Once. Twice. And then it stopped. Hours passed. Or minutes. Time no longer held meaning. When at last the sun sank once more behind the jagged line of trees, darkness descended like a smothering shroud, and with it came the sounds, the low growls, the wet crunch of bone, and that maddening, childlike laughter, all around them, above them, beneath them. The cabin was not safe. Nowhere was. Hannah felt her sanity slipping, unraveling like frayed thread. And outside, something waited. By the third day, the line between waking and nightmare had dissolved. Neither of them could eat. The single candle they lit for comfort cast monstrous shadows across the peeling wallpaper, distorting their faces into grotesque masks of fear. Every sound, the drip of water, the groan of wood, felt like a herald of death. And then, without warning, the knocking began. Not on the front door. Not on the windows. But from beneath the floorboards. At first, they thought it imagination, the product of sleep deprivation and terror, but no. It was real. Slow, methodical thuds from somewhere below, like something crawling through unseen tunnels, scratching at the ancient planks. The first bloodstain appeared that evening, seeping up between the floorboards like sap from a wounded tree, thick, dark, and warm. Hannah screamed, stumbling back as the sticky liquid oozed in glistening rivulets across the warped floor. Tyler dropped the knife. And that's when they heard the voice. It was not human. It was not animal. It was both. Something grotesque stitched together from the worst elements of each, a high, sing-song melody whispered directly into their ears though no one was there. Little pigs, let me in." The front door shook violently. They barricaded it with everything they could find, furniture, broken planks, their own shivering bodies pressed tight against it, but the pounding only grew louder, more frantic, until the hinges moaned under the strain. And then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. When silence fell, it was absolute, suffocating. Tyler wept openly, collapsing to his knees, his mind buckling under the weight of what could not be explained. Hannah sat beside him, hands slick with sweat and blood, her eyes fixed on the door, waiting, listening. The smell was worse now. Rotting meat. Wet fur. And something else, something sweet, cloying, the scent of decay. When dawn came, what remained of their sanity had all but crumbled. And on the cabin's front step, left like a grotesque gift, was a severed hand. Fresh. Still twitching. The hand was human. Or had been. Hannah recognized the gold wedding band still clinging to one bony finger, the flesh sloughing away in slick ribbons. Tyler vomited into the snow, retching until only bile spilled from his lips. They had to end it. The cabin was no longer a refuge, it was a tomb. Together, barely able to stand, they ventured into the forest. The sky overhead was the color of lead, the trees' skeletal sentinels watching in silent indifference as they stumbled deeper, guided only by the trail of blood and the distant, sickly laughter that seemed to echo from every direction. Hours passed. Or days. They found the first body hanging from a tree, its limbs twisted into impossible angles, the skin peeled away to reveal glistening muscle, teeth embedded in its exposed throat. The eyes had been removed. Deeper still, more carnage. A family, mother, father, child, nailed to trees in a macabre tableau, their entrails arranged into crude symbols on the snow. Hannah collapsed, screaming, her mind fracturing, unable to reconcile the horror before her. And then, they saw it. The cabin. Not their cabin, but another, identical, yet wrong. The wood blackened, the windows cracked, something alive writhing beneath the eaves like worms beneath rotting flesh. Tyler hesitated, then moved forward, drawn by something unseen, as if invisible strings pulled his limbs. Hannah screamed for him to stop, but he did not. The door swung open without touch. Inside, madness. The walls were slick with blood, the floors carpeted in viscera. Human faces, hundreds of them, stretched across the beams like grotesque wallpaper, mouths frozen in eternal screams. And in the center, it. A figure of stitched flesh, human and not, its face a patchwork of stolen skin, its eyes gleaming black and soulless. It smiled. Tyler did not scream as the creature tore into him, peeling flesh from muscle, snapping bones like dry twigs. He gurgled, twitched, and was silent. Hannah ran. She did not look back. She doesn't remember how long she ran. Through endless trees, through night and day, her mind unraveling strand by strand until her own name felt foreign, meaningless. The forest changed around her. Trees twisted into impossible shapes, branches forming cages that clawed at her flesh, leaving trails of blood. And always, always, the laughter. Eventually, she collapsed. When she woke, the cabin loomed once more. Her cabin. As if nothing had happened. The truck sat undisturbed. The sky was clear. Birds sang. Tyler was inside, whole, unmarked, smiling. "Honey," he said, his voice smooth, "Wrong, you okay? Bad dream?" She screamed. The door slammed shut. And the hunt began anew. The cabin watches. The woods remember. And the killer, whatever it truly is, will feast forever.